This is Road Noise, episode number 29. The story behind my play and the forthcoming novel, Mr. Long Said Nothing. Hello and welcome again into Road Noise, life 1 mile at a time. I'm your host, Michael Blackston. You're sitting in the passenger seat alongside me as I travel all over the Southeast doing my job, and right now I'm between Conway, South Carolina and my house. Closer to Conway than I am the house, but I'm in the ballpark of halfway home, and it's time to record another episode. If you hear something, the sound of some sort of rumble under my voice, well, that's the sound of the road, hence the reason we call the show Road Noise, life 1 mile at a time. And in today's episode, I'm going to talk about Mr. Long Said Nothing. That's the play I wrote, my very first play I completed and saw an inaugural run back in June of 2013. I'm going to tell you all about it from start to finish, how it came to be. And the reason is because I've wanted to do a show about that for a while. It's so near and dear to my heart that I want to share it with you. And while I think I've given you a lot of information before about it, and I definitely mention it probably just about every show right now while I'm writing the novel, I've never really done an entire episode dedicated to it. So if you've heard all this before and you're saying, not again, I'm so sorry, but this will be the only show I dedicate completely to Mr. Long Said Nothing. And so I hope you'll bear with me. And if you haven't heard the story behind it, it's really interesting and I think you'll like it. So stick around for that. Before we get started, though, I want to mention kind of a tease of a series I'd like to do with this show in the near future. One of the more popular episodes that I produced was one of the more recent ones called Permission to Change Your Mind, and I've gotten a lot of downloads for that specific show, and it's made me think a lot about society and kind of what today's culture is all about. And I think one of the biggest problems that we tend to have in our culture is we don't give ourselves permission to do some of the things that we need to do. We kind of want to go with the flow and follow the crowd, and even if it's against the grain of what we believe or what we're feeling at the moment, and we don't want to give ourselves permission to think outside of the box or to go a different direction. And Permission to Change Your Mind, I think, kind of struck a chord with some people. And so I want to do a series on permission. That would be the first one in the series, but now I'll probably, when I do release them, release the rest of the Permission series consecutively. In that series, I'm going to talk about giving yourself permission to do these things: permission to heal, permission to forgive, permission to rest, permission to leave, and permission to tell. Some of that stuff will be, easy going, like permission to rest and permission to heal. Maybe that might be a little, I don't know, permission to heal might get a little deep, but some of this, permission to leave, I'm going to kind of talk to people who are in situations that they don't feel like they can get out of, and I'm going to give them permission to find a way out. And permission to tell is, you can imagine, that might have some very deep things. In fact, I've got an idea of an interview I wouldn't mind doing if the person, even anonymously, would be willing to. I think I'm going to get them to sit in the car with me, and we're going to go on a drive and give this person a microphone as well. I don't know. I haven't even talked to him about it. But anyway, it's the Permission to Leave, or the Permissions series that I'm going to do, hopefully coming up in a little short while. I've made a list of a lot of topics now that I want to talk about on this show. And so I feel pretty good about always having something that I can go to for a topic. And today's going to be Mr. Long Said Nothing, episode 29. You've heard me talk about it a lot if you've listened to back episodes of this podcast. Mr. Long Said Nothing is a play that I wrote, and I finished it in 2012. And let's just start from the beginning. Let me start from the very, very first iteration of any inkling of spark of thought for this play. Okay, so I can't remember if it was right after my wife and I got married, but I don't think so. I think it was a couple of years before we got married, at least. And we were driving down the back roads of South Carolina, between Pendleton, South Carolina, and Greenville. And if you take the back roads, you can go through a little community called Slabtown. So we're driving, and my wife is actually doing the driving. And we're passing this church. There's a church on the left and an old cemetery on the right. And I didn't take any notice of really anything. I was kind of in my own zone, talking whatever I was going to be doing. But my wife says, as we're passing by the cemetery, she says, "What you doing, Mr. Long?" And then there was a pause, a little bit of silence. And she said, "Mr. Long said nothing." And I thought, that's a curious conversation to have with yourself. And I asked her, "What are you doing? What does that mean?" So she turned around and went back to the cemetery and showed me something that I had missed as we passed by. Right at the road, right at the front of the cemetery, is this beautiful marble placement of a monument that is topped off with a statue of a man, a really dapper gentleman, holding his hat in one hand, and he's standing on this tall pedestal, and all around him is this marble, just this huge monument to this man with a gate and all kinds of stuff. And the name on the front of the monument was Long. And she showed me the statue and said, "When me and my dad would drive down this way," because this was my dad's back roads way, to go to see her brother Phil. He lived in Easley, South Carolina, so he would drive down the back roads to visit, that way to stay away from the big traffic. So one day when they were passing the statue, he nudged her and said, "Hey, ask Mr. Long what he's doing." So she said, "What you doing, Mr. Long?" And her dad replied, "Mr. Long said nothing." Kind of a double entendre, because he's a statue, he said nothing. But if he could talk, maybe he would say nothing. So it's kind of a double meaning there and a little joke between them. And every time they would pass from that point on, as she was a little girl, she would say, "What you doing, Mr. Long?" And her dad would reply, "Mr. Long said nothing." I thought that was really neat. Immediately when I found out and understood this game she's talking about with her dad, I thought, how wonderful. That's such a neat little tradition, and there's got to be a story in that somewhere. And immediately I thought, what if Mr. Long actually spoke back one day? And she thought, I think she said something to the point of, I'd probably pass out. My gears started turning, and my first thought was novel. This has got to be a novel. And I was already thinking at that point, I like to start a lot of novels. This feels like it needs to be finished. And as we talked, we decided it would make a better play, we thought, than a book. Maybe it should at least start out as a play. So I asked for permission to fictionalize it using members of her family as as inspiration. I didn't use anybody specifically. I changed all the names except for one. And I said if I change some stuff and I would like to kind of use this as the basis behind a story that would make a really great play. And she said, that's a good idea. I like that. I would have no problem with that. So that rattled around in my mind for 20 years. For 20 years, I would tell people I'm writing a play called Mr. Long Said Nothing. And I would tell people about the premise of it, and they would think, oh, that sounds really neat. I'd like to see it when you're done. That kind of a thing. And at one point, I even, probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little more than that, maybe 15 years ago, I actually did start penning a script for it. And I got maybe a quarter of the way through Act 1, and I lost the manuscript. We moved, and I don't know what happened to the manuscript. I later found the first part, maybe the first eighth of that script, but there was more to it. And now that I read it, I'm glad that I went a different direction. I feel like it was providence that script was lost and we started over. And actually, since then, I have changed the very first scene again. But I was telling one of my friends about doing this play that I was writing, during the cast party of a show that he and I had been in together. He was a young friend of mine. He was still in high school, and a very talented young man, very talented actor and speaker. And I got a text one day while I was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on one of my etching trips back in 2012, either late 2011 or 2012, somewhere around that time. And he said, Michael, I'm getting ready to do a literary competition where I've got to do a scene from a show. I would really like to do a scene from Mr. Long Said Nothing, because nobody will have ever heard of it before. I know nobody else is going to do it. It's kind of, I can make it my own. I would really love that if you would be willing to allow me to. And I told my friend, I'm sorry. There's not a scene. And he said to me, and really, this is the kicker that has inspired me and really changed my life and the way I see things and my creative juices and doing things from start to finish instead of starting something and then seeing the next shiny object and moving on to that and then never finishing anything. This was the catalyst for this, and I have my friend to thank for this. He said, I thought you told me you were writing a play. And I said, well, I am. And he said, but you don't have any scenes for it. I said, no, nothing on paper. He said, then you're not writing a play. He said, you have an idea for a play, but you're not writing anything unless you've got something written down. Oh my gosh. He's right. You can talk all day long about things you'd like to do. You can have something from start to finish in your head. You can know the plot line backward and forward. You can know what's going to happen in the first scene all the way to the end scene and everything in the middle. But unless you actually have it documented, you haven't written a thing. You're creating something, yes. It's stewing in there. You're mulling it around, but you're not writing anything. It's never going to see a screen until there's a stage until there's a script. It's never going to see a bookstore until there's a manuscript. You can't say you're a writer if you're not writing. And that made a lot of sense to me and was a eureka moment for me. I apologized to my friend and I finished the text out, and I laid there for a few minutes on the bed. I remember this distinctly. It was dark in there. I kind of had the TV on, but I had turned it off when he started texting, and I was just laying there in the almost dark. It wasn't quite dark yet, but it was almost dark, and the room was very dark and dim. And I laid there on the bed, and I thought, Michael, what do you want to be? Do you want to be known for having great ideas and never following through with them, or do you want to be able to say, I did this? Whether an actor ever even utters the word or a word from your script, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a part of creating something real, or do you just want to die having had ideas? And that's not me. I didn't want to die having had ideas. I like to see things through. And I think part of the reason I never followed through with it at first was because I didn't believe in myself. I believed in the story, but I didn't believe in myself. Therefore, I wasn't really believing in the story. Because I didn't believe in myself, I was kind of glazing over everything about myself, and that included the plot line of the story. And it dawned on me at that moment that he knew the plot line. I had already told him, and he found it interesting and interesting enough to try to use it in something that meant something for him. He was going to use that as a basis for a competition. That's what he wanted to do. He liked it that much. So I said, there's something to this. It needs to be written. And I got up off of my bed. I went to the closest store that had pens and spiral notebook, or one of those composition notebooks, I think is what I bought. One of those little black and white speckled notebooks that has title and subject on the front of it, the little white square that has the lines, and you write that in. I think that's what I got. But anyway, I went and I found a restaurant, ordered some food and a glass of sweet tea, and I opened the book and I wrote Act 1, Scene 1, Mr. Long Said Nothing. 6 months later, I had the honor and the privilege of writing the end. Blackout, Mr. Long Said Nothing, the end, on my very first play. Yeah, it was the first draft, and there was more work to do, but I finished it. It took 6 months. It didn't take 5 years. I had been thinking this thing over for 20 years. And in 6 months, I had created it. And that's what I did. I would go eat my supper at a restaurant where someone could bring me refills on my beverage, and I would sit there and write when I was away, and it kept me busy, kept my mind off things that didn't need to be on while I was on my travels, and I became passionate about it. The more I got going, the more I just became passionate, and I saw this plot line and this storyline come alive, in my mind at least. So I finished it, and I finished draft number 1. Then in July, I think, of 2012, July of 2012, I finished the second draft, and I gave it to my wife, and I said, all right, I want you to read this. This is basically you. Yeah, all the things that happen in the story are fictionalized, and the characters' names have been changed, but I used you guys as inspiration, and there is a lot of you and your family in it. I wanted to honor them that way. And so I needed Kayla to read it and tell me what she thought. She read it, and she absolutely adored it. Then I said, I want your sister, Thea, to read it, because Thea she's very traditional-minded. You know, she loves family and honors tradition and stuff like that, and I thought it would be nice to know that someone in the family other than my wife approves of the script. Kayla's mother and father had already passed. Her brother Phil had already passed. And she only had 2 surviving siblings, Jerry and Thea. And since then, Jerry has passed. Thank goodness, as far as I know, Thea's in good health, and she'll be with us for a long time. But Jerry really wasn't doing well at the time either, though. At that time, he was battling with cancer. So we gave the script to Thea, and it blew her away. She loved it. So from that point on, I said, well, let's see what other people think. And so I got it into the hands of some people who were proofreaders who said, you know, I like this, maybe we need to work on this. And there were very little changes after draft 2 that anybody wanted to make. There were a couple of little things here and there. But one of the people that test read it for me was Tony King, the manager at the local theater. And she called me up one day and said, Michael, in September, we're going to have a big festival on the square. What do you think of us opening the theater and having you and some people of your choice, if you can round them up, do a live reading of Mr. Long Said Nothing at the theater, and people can come in for free, get out of the heat, because September in the South is an abomination of heat. You know, make water and soft drinks and stuff, cold beverages available to them, and they can come in and have a rest from the festival for a couple of hours and maybe see what people think of your play by acting it out, of course, script in hand with a live reading. And I thought that was a great idea. It really was such an honor to be even asked, but she liked the script well enough and thought that it was an interesting enough story and plotline to make that happen. So, of course, I said, yeah, let's do it. But I didn't want to just have a reading. I didn't want to just sit around a table like a lot of these theaters do when you do readings, sit around a table and everybody act it out. I said, let's act it out. This is something that I feel like kind of needs to be acted out. So I rounded up my group of people who were going to be my actors from the local theater pool of actors that we have, and I had no trouble getting people to agree to do it. And we had one rehearsal where I basically said, this is where I want you to be, this is where you kind of go. It blocked it out very basically. I mean, we're talking about a couple of chairs on the stage. The pedestal Mr. Long stood on in the center of upstage was a chair. I mean, that was what the pedestal was. And I played Mr. Long because I knew how I wanted the acting out of that character to be. And we held that, and it went over really well. First of all, I didn't expect as many people to show up, and it's not like they packed out the auditorium, but there were several more people there than I thought would be there. And at the end, I offered to do a question and answer period. I wanted to know how people liked it, and if they saw any plot holes, if they had any questions, if, whatever, question and answer period. And I sat down on the edge of the stage and took a few questions, and surprisingly to me, there were several. And one of the questions that came up was, when are we going to get to see this live, full version of this play? Well, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting anybody to really care. That's just because I'm an artist and I'm insecure, but I didn't expect anybody to like it enough to care. But they wanted to see more. They wanted to see the actual production. And I told them then, I said, that's not up to me. I said, the Elbert Theater Foundation has to approve something like that, and I just, this is the first step. If you guys think it's something you'd like to see, maybe we'll ask around and see if it's something they'd be interested in, but it has to be approved by the play selection committee and all this stuff, yada, yada, yada. To my surprise, a few weeks later, I get a phone call again from Tony that says, Michael, the Elbert Theater Foundation, ETF, has talked about it, and we're wondering if you'd be willing to put on a full run, 6-show run of Mr. Long Said Nothing. We've got a block of time at the theater that we can add an extra show to the season and let it be yours. Would you be willing to do that? And my heart dropped. I never expected this. Of course I want to do that. So, in April of 2013, we put together the cast and started rehearsing Mr. Long Said Nothing. I directed it. I did not play... Well, I played a very small kind of cursory role in it that I really didn't... I mean, the guy shows up in a couple of scenes. I said, I'm not going to make somebody come to rehearsals all of this time just to pop in this couple of scenes, so I'm going to go ahead and play that part myself, which I did, but the role of Mr. Long went to my good friend and phenomenal actor, David Bennett, and I'm so glad that he did. I'll try to remember to put a link to the Mr. Long Said Nothing page on the show notes for this. So you can go to roadnoisepodcast.com and look for the link for the Mr. Long Said Nothing page. I used to have one. It may be inactive now, but it's an old Wix site, but it will give you some information, show you some still shots from it. And if you're interested, it's something I think you'd find really interesting. And all the synopsis and all of that is on the show. Basically, the way I wrote it was early 1900s, southern town. I didn't give the town a specific name. I changed everything a little bit. The story, there's really no backstory for Mr. Long other than it's a statue in the cemetery. I didn't go into the family. I tried to find the family that belongs to that statue in real life, and I found one person at the church that's kind of a historian, and she gave me a little information, but everything was kind of hearsay. It was very difficult tracking people down. But I changed so much that I just decided to completely fictionalize everything. So it was a little small town that I never gave a name. It starts off with the main character, the protagonist, Catherine Landers. She's a little girl, very small at the very beginning, like 6 or 7 years old. And her father... They don't drive past the statue because they're poor, and they walk past the statue on their way to see Catherine's brother. And the whole thing starts with, what you doing, Mr. Long? Mr. Long Said Nothing. It becomes a tradition between her and her father. And as the first act progresses, you see their relationship grow and develop, and just the love that they have for one another, with that stop at the cemetery in front of Mr. Long, and that piece of tradition, "What you doing, Mr. Long?" or it actually turns into eventually, "Hello, Mr. Long." Mr. Long said nothing. And it goes from there. Act 1 culminates with a major event, which leads into the audience gasping right before the curtain closes, and everything turning upside down in Act 2 in a very dramatic and poignant way. I just realized that I have this on my YouTube channel. I don't advertise this very often because I don't know, it's only gone through one production, and we did video it, so I don't really advertise too much. If you would like to watch the play, we did video it, and I do have it on my YouTube channel. You just go to YouTube and look for Everything Arts, and you can also type in Michael Blackston, Everything Arts, and my YouTube channel will come up, and it's got a few videos of me doing I tried some vlogging with my blog. I didn't really like the way that turned out, so I kind of quit doing that. Got some other ideas, and I've got me singing Music of the Night, some audio from that, and just things like that. But I've also got some Mr. Long stuff. I've got an 8-minute testimonial video from some of the people who saw it and some of the people who were in it, and then it's interspersed throughout with clips. I've also got the entire video, though. You can watch the entire play from start to finish. Now, the first and last scenes have since been changed, but I think it made a very neat video. I mean, we're a small-town theater, we're amateurs, and, it shows in that because we don't have the best sound quality. There's a little bit of a buzz behind the voices and things like that, but I think for a small-town theater group, they did a fantastic job, and Mr. David Bennett, one of my very dearest and best friends, absolutely set the bar for the role of Mr. Long. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I want you to watch it to find out why I keep calling that statue a character and why a person had to play it. And I'm not going to tell you any more about that, but I will tell you there is a behind-the-scenes video, I think it's about 8 minutes long, also called From James to Mr. Long in Minutes, and it shows the transformation of the actor Mr. Bennett, going from the character of James Landers, Catherine's father, into the statue of Mr. Long. And it's some really neat kind of stage theatrics that we put together, some special effects that we put together to make that happen, and it really turned out really well. And the audience would gasp every time. Right there at the end of Act 1, the audience would just gasp, and they didn't realize what had happened almost right in front of their eyes. So go to that, Everything Arts, Michael Blackston, Everything Arts. That's my YouTube channel, and you can watch the entire show of Mr. Long Said Nothing. One of the reasons that I wanted to go ahead and talk about that show in a little more detail is because I got great news this week. This is going to lead up into my week. I got great news this week. I've talked about it a couple of times, but I've said it was kind of up in the air. But I got confirmation that the Elbert Theater Foundation has now approved Friends Like You, my next play that I finished. It will be produced for a full 6-show run on the Arts Center stage at my theater in the summer of 2017. So we'll start just a couple of weeks ago, will be a year from now that we will hold auditions and start rehearsals, and in the middle of June of 2017 we're going to produce Friends Like You. And it's a comedy. It's 180 degrees from Mr. Long Said Nothing. The only thing that is similar is that one of the leads uses a British accent. I don't know what it is about it. I like to write dialogue with a British accent, and that excited me. I've written 2 plays now to completion, and both of them will have been produced. I can't say that it has just knocked the walls down for anybody that's watched them. This is my local theater. These are people who know me and like me, but there are a lot of playwrights who never get a chance to see their work performed. They write and they send it out, and they try to get some legs under it, and they never get to see it performed. And truth be told, I have not seen another production of Mr. Long happen yet, but I haven't really pushed it that hard. But one thing I do know is the more you do, the more that you're out there, the more opportunity comes. And if I have other people that say, say somebody really liked Friends Like You and decides to put it on, then that opens the door for them to maybe peruse the script of Mr. Long, and maybe I see it. And things like that snowball, and other productions of these shows get made. That's just the way it works. You keep doing it. You don't do one and then stop. You just keep on plugging along until the right door gets opened. And I'm so excited because part of my week this week was that I got that news that Friends Like You is approved and will be produced in 2017, and I'm just excited. I'm not going to direct it. I'm going to let somebody else direct it. My good friend Bob Larson, one of the few people I trust with my script, is going to direct this show, and I'm going to put it in his hands, and I think it's going to be neat to see what happens with someone else's vision of what I wrote. I'll be there to be sort of not a coordinator, but a consultant. I'm sure he'll say, well, what are you thinking here and there? But this is going to be Bob's show as far as being the director. I'm not going to step in and try to be a busybody about it. He'll be the director, and I'm looking so forward to that. The rest of what I want to tell you about this week, there were a couple of things that also happened this week that are just really great, and one of them was a life lesson that happened this morning. I'll tell that last. The first thing was, I'm so blessed. I've been so busy. I spent this entire week in Conway, South Carolina. I'm supposed to be etching right now in Conway, but I worked my fingers almost literally to the bone from Monday all the way through 1:30 in the morning this morning, and today is Friday. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I went home at a normal time. I worked a little bit over, but I worked all day, no lunches, just worked straight through, moving my hands, scratching on granite, got a lot of work done because there was just so much work to do when I got there. This is probably my most consistent number one customer. And when I got there was just so much more work than I thought, and then something else was added, and this huge stone that I had to do that had to be finished before I left, it was taking a lot longer than I thought it was going to. And so last night I ended up staying. I went at about 5:30. I left, went to Olive Garden, got some supper, and then came back at 7 o'clock, and I worked from 7 o'clock at night till 1:30 this morning before I finally finished it. And I had worked all day on Thursday as well. What happened, though, is I came very close to doing a little nerve damage to my hand. I have to be very careful, and I started feeling some kind of nerve tweaking in my hand, and it needed to rest. And so this morning I just decided I can't finish it all. I'm going to have to stop what I'm doing, or I'm going to be messed up and I'm going to ruin my hand. So I'm going to have to go back into Conway, not next week but the week after that, and finish what I started. And there's plenty more to do, so that'll be fine. So I'll build them, though, for what I did this week, and I'm not going to say the amount, but if I did what I did this week every week of this year, which I'm not. I mean, these last week and this week were almost the exact same amounts. But it's amazing the work that I'm getting right now. And what I'm praise reporting right now is I told you last episode that we're going to Disney. And I was able, through last week's income and this week's income, I was able to pay last week for the trip, the lodging, and all of the tickets for 4 people. And we're splitting a house with 2 other families of my family that are going, so that really was a help. But I was able to just hand my stepdad cash and say, go ahead and book this place. Oh, and by the way, get our tickets for us to all the parks. That was paid for last week, done. We're going in June. And now this week, I wanted to have a good, nice, easy time, not worrying about money, and I want to have plenty of spending money so that I didn't have to tell my son, no, I can't get that for you. That's too expensive. I didn't want to do that. I mean, we're not going to be stupid, but at the same time, when you go somewhere like that, you don't want to be having to pinch pennies at every turn. You know, I'm sorry, son, we can't afford for you to have any water. Why don't you go dip your head over there in that mud puddle that you see over there, and let's save a couple of nickels. I didn't want to do that. I want to be able to go take my family and just have a great time. In the 20 years that my wife and I have been married, last October was the first time we've been able to take a vacation, a real vacation, and we did it. Went to Universal Studios, and this coming June, in just a few weeks, we're going to Disney for this year's vacation, and I'm just so tickled that I can do that for my family. And then this morning, this is kind of a life lesson that I want you to take, because you can't really take a whole lot of anything you can use from this episode. This is just information about my story of Mr. Long. So I want to give you something you can use, and I learned a life lesson today. I was in McDonald's this morning getting some breakfast while I was waiting for everybody to get into the office. And I walk up to the counter. All I wanted was a coffee. And I walk up to the counter, and the little young lady walks up and just looks at me with this blank look on her face, almost angry. At least that's what I thought. Like she would rather be anywhere but there helping me. And if there's one thing I can't stand, especially as a business owner, is a lack of customer service. When somebody looks like you're just doing them a disservice by even standing there breathing. And that's what I was getting from this girl. She just walked up, just looked at me, didn't say, "How can I help you?" She just looked at me and waited. That was number one. So I smiled, and I asked for my coffee and ordered it the way I want. She didn't say anything. She just looked down at the register and then turned around to start making the coffee. That really bothered me. This was a serious lack of customer service, and it was getting on my nerves. So I came really close to being snide, snarky, sarcastic with this girl. But I'm a Christian, and I don't believe that that's the way we are to people, especially if we don't know their situation. I'm not saying don't ever take up for yourself, but you never want to put on... Just because you're getting the bad end of the stick doesn't mean you want to turn around and give them the bad end of the stick. I know my Bible tells me to kill people with kindness. That's not what it says, but it's basically the idea. So I said, all right, I want to be like Jesus. What would Jesus do? I wasn't wearing the bracelet, but I asked myself, what would Jesus do? Jesus would say, what's wrong? So I asked the girl, I said, is everything okay this morning? She says, no, I'm sick. And immediately my whole countenance softened, and I said, I'm sorry, it got the crud or something. She said, no, I've got sickle cell anemia, and I'm in a lot of pain. I nearly started crying. I was on the edge of making this girl's day worse because I was judging the way she was being. I was saying that her customer service was not meeting up to my standards, and it was because I assumed she was being slack and lazy and snotty and just didn't want to be there when the girl was working through pain. Now, I told my wife about this just a few minutes after this, and she and I agreed the girl doesn't need to be at work. You know, if she's in that kind of pain, she probably needs to be at home resting, poor thing. And I did tell her, I said, I hope you get to feeling better, and I'm going to say a prayer for you. I told her, I'm going to say a prayer for you. It changed my day, though. I kind of was in a bad mood. I'm tired. I didn't get much sleep. You know, I stopped etching at 1:30. I went to bed about 1:35. I laid on the couch there in the office where I was working. I woke up at 4:30. I got 3 hours of sleep. I was tired, and I have a 6-hour drive ahead of me. And at that time, I was thinking I was going to be etching the full day, too. This girl needs your prayers, because she's battling an illness that is painful and is serious, yet she's working. She may not be putting on the best personality, but she's working, and I respect that. So I lift that girl up, and I hope that she is feeling better, and I hope she gets the attention she needs and is able to get the rest she needs, and maybe the pain will subside. At least that's what I pray. And then the last thing I want to do, because I'm way over on this episode, I'm 10 minutes past what I needed to be. I need to try to keep this at 30 minutes. Well, I'm at 40 right now. So I want to tell you my positive review, which is Mountain Dew Kickstart. On a day like today, when you've been up since 4:30 this morning and you went to bed just 3 hours before that, you need something to keep you up. Mountain Dew's Kickstart. I love Mountain Dew's Kickstart, and I couldn't think of anything to write a positive review about. And right before I was getting ready to do this episode, I've stopped and used the bathroom because I said I don't want to be having to pee while I'm trying to do this episode. My mind will be on that. Let me go to the bathroom, and I need some gas, and I'll put some gas in the car, and I need something to kind of pep me up a little bit. I'm not real sleepy, but I want a Kickstart. So I went and found a Mountain Dew Kickstart, and as I was pumping the gas, trying to think of my positive review, I kind of looked down, and there's Mountain Dew Kickstart. And I love Mountain Dew Kickstart. It doesn't have that acrid kind of acidy taste that a lot of those energy drinks have. It's just basically an orange Fanta-ish kind of sun-kissed kind of tasting thing by Mountain Dew. It's not as sweet as those, or at least it doesn't taste as sweet, but it has, whereas I think a regular Mountain Dew has 40 or something, 50 maybe grams of caffeine, however they measure that. It's double that for a Kickstart. It's like 94, 95 grams of caffeine. So it'll give you a little bit of a kickstart, but it tastes a little bit better than some of that other stuff to me. And so I really like the Mountain Dew Kickstart, and if you ever need a kickstart, get a Mountain Dew Kickstart. Unfortunately, I can't send them a bill for this promo. I'd love to, but I can't because they didn't ask me to do that. This is just on my own. If you'd like to get in touch with me, here's the way you do it. I've got a phone number. You can get in touch with me via voicemail at 706-408-7456. That's 706-408-7456. You can also email me at feedback@michaelblackston.com. Yeah, that's right. feedback@michaelblackston.com. I want to ask you to go visit my blog. You go to michaelblackston.com or funnymessylife.com. And I want to ask you to subscribe to my blog. It's a comedy blog. It's an article blog. It's a read. So if you're not a reader, it's probably not for you. But if you're a reader, once a week I release a comedy blog, and it's pretty darn funny. Everybody who's read it and left a comment has been positive, and I'm really trying to boost my subscription. So if you don't mind, if it's something you like, subscribe to the blog. Again, michaelblackston.com or funnymessylife.com. It takes you to the same place, and that's what the blog's called, Michael Blackston, Funny Messy Life. And subscribe. It's right there on the right column. And all you got to do is put in your email. I'm not going to be spamming you all the time. You'll probably get one email a week, and that's when I release the blog. And it puts it right there in your inbox. You don't have to go search for it. It's just you open up the email. There's my blog, and you can read it. So please go subscribe to that. Also, check me out on iTunes. If you go to roadnoisepodcast.com, you can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes there. And give me a rating and review, too, if you happen to be there and would like to help me out that way, help me to be seen and whatnot and all that jazz. So I'm coming up into Columbia, South Carolina. Traffic's about to get bad. I have the air conditioner turned off so that there's no more background noise than I have to have other than the road, which means on a humid day where there are April showers going on, and the road just got really rough, it's hot in this car. And I'm ready to turn on the air conditioner, so I'm going to call this quits until next time. I'm Michael Blackston. Thanks for sitting in the passenger seat for Road Noise Life 1 Mile at a Time as we learn to live life 1 mile at a time.